Hi class, my name is Gemma Andaya. I'm a mental health and substance abuse counselor in private practice in the Henderson, Nevada area. I'm also an adjunct faculty member at Great Basin College. One of your professors and director of the program, Professor Sita, has asked me to record some lectures to just give some tips and suggestions in regards to counseling skills. And so I've been spending some time, really sitting with this request and meditating on what are the major components that I feel are most relevant to you at this level of your education for this undergraduate Introduction to Counseling Skills class. And so I believe I'm going to break this down into two different segments. The first segment, which you're watching now, is going to be setting the psychological stage for counseling. So this is pre-counseling, some suggestions and things to look out for. And then the second segment will be on actual counseling skills, during a session, what that might look like. It's my understanding that not all of the students in this class are going to move forward in becoming licensed practicing counselors or therapists for that matter. So I am going to try to frame this in a way that is relevant to you in whatever career you choose to move forward in. So I'm currently a student in a PhD in counselor education and supervision program. And so I've been practicing as a counselor for years and as an educator for a few years now. So I feel very confident in those roles. But when it comes to, and even in supervision, that's something that's fairly new, but I feel very confident that I can easily transfer the skills that I have gained in these other roles that I carry into supervision easily. But when it comes to research, I'm starting to have some hesitancy that I could be proficient in this role. But I've been talking with a few other researchers, and they say that having a foundation of counseling skills and interviewing skills and just understanding people is actually quite helpful as a researcher, especially if you're going to go into like the qualitative research realm where there is a lot of interviewing. And so I guess I'm sharing that with you because I want you to see how even if you're not going to become a counselor or therapist or anything to do in the helping field, having these, we could generalize them and call them communication skills, people skills, are going to be an asset to you in your development as a professional in whatever field you choose. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and start. So the topic for today is going to be setting the psychological stage for a counseling session. So instead of calling it counseling session, I'm going to go ahead and call it for an interview. Okay? So setting the psychological stage. Point number one I want to get across is that ambiance in the office is very much important. It's the first thing that people are going to see when they walk into your office space. That office space is a representation of you as an individual. So I understand that whether you're working within an agency or a practice, you're not going to go out there and be fully self-employed. So you're not going to have as much control as one would like over a setting. But there are some things that you can do to the setting to help create an environment that's conducive to intimacy and connection. So a few things that I can think of right off the top of my head is obviously the stuff on the walls. You might want to be using the art on the walls as visual cues. There might be, certain artwork that promotes a sense of peace and serenity. There might be some artwork that kind of makes you question and say like, I wonder what that's about, and it kind of triggers that creative side of the mind. In addition, you want to think about the setup of the sitting arrangements. Typically you want to have nothing in between you and the client so that there isn't any physical blockages to your connecting with them. So if there's a coffee table in between, that creates more distance in between. And maybe for beginning, for novice professionals, that might actually feel like a safer thing to start with, is to start with some distance in between you and that interviewee. But as you get through this profession, become more confident in your own skills, you might actually want to have that deeper, intimate connection. And if you can foster that by arranging the sitting arrangements a certain way, then why not? So, removing any blockages between you and that person, you want to be aware of how the chairs are facing each other, and, even the size of the chairs. If your chair is bigger and taller than theirs, then that might automatically give a sense of, I'm in authority here. And, that's going to initiate a different type of response than if both chairs were equal, facing each other. That might make a difference in regards to that authority power dynamic in the room, which, as much as we'd like to think that there isn't, typically even with therapists, that dynamic is very much present. So that's my first tip, is in regards to the ambiance, in setting the psychological stage. The second component that I think is important to remember when we're setting the stage prior to the interview is your professional composure or appearance as a whole. So that could mean your manner of dress. What I have found is that certain, maybe agencies, maybe nonprofits, have more of like a sit back, laissez-faire type of dress code. And while I think that it's important to be comfortable and not to overdress, because it might be a little bit intimidating in an environment where everybody else is kind of casual, I still think it's important for you or anyone as a professional to hold certain standards about manner of dress. So even though you might be serving an underserved population or someone who is low on the socioeconomic status, I would still say it's very important that as a professional, you hold yourself to a certain bar and you present yourself such as that, whether that is just jeans and a button-up, or whether that, if you want to go all out and do a suit, you have to pick and choose the environments that it's appropriate for, of course. In terms of professional presentation, there are other things to keep an eye on to set the right psychological stage before we begin an interview, and that's the first interaction between you and that interviewee or client. From that first handshake and the eye contact, communicating a sense of sureness and confidence, while at the same time trying to communicate a sense of openness. So in the posture when you're sitting down, if I'm sitting down with my arms crossed and my face is kind of, confused or angry, that might not communicate openness, or it might be triggering for that person. So I want to try to, without overdoing it and overacting, create a sense of safety. I'm a secure person in my emotions and in my thoughts, and I can model that for you in the way that I communicate myself, even when I become emotionally triggered through our own interactions. I'm still human, so I might show that a little bit, But then I'll ration my way through those emotions and communicate that with you. So, there's different things to keep in consideration in regards to professional presentation. So far we've covered ambiance, professional presentation, and the third thing I wanted to discuss that is appropriate for setting a psychological stage before an interview or a session is to consider cultural sensitivity. So, for example, when I'm working with someone from an Asian background, I've noticed that they have certain gestures, such as like bowing, hello, nice to meet you. They avoid very direct eye contact. It could be seen as disrespectful. When I'm working with a couple, depending on their interactions, I will take a step back, engage, and see who comes to shake my hand first. You don't want to assume that you go to the male first, because I feel like in our society that's kind of the approach that you would take. But in some cultures, it would be, it is appropriate to greet the male first, and then the female. But I kind of take a step back and let them lead, and then I'll follow. In terms of cultural appropriateness, sometimes, and I think I'm jumping ahead of myself because this might be more so appropriate for the next segment, but I'll just touch on it here. Sometimes it's necessary for us to keep our ears open to the political climate, and how that might be affecting our dynamic with certain populations or clients. I'm not saying that you, of course, are going to have your own political beliefs. I just want you to be aware, first of all, sensitive and empathetic to how your own presentation or race or socioeconomic status or position of power might be affecting someone who maybe is a minority, or currently there's this climate of sexual harassment and sexual abuse with the Me Too movement becoming more popular, how the types of jokes that you might be saying could be perceived as inappropriate. You as a professional, you have to hold yourself to a higher regard and pay attention to what's going on in our culture, in our society, and be sensitive to those types of things. I'm not saying you can hold your own beliefs and desires and feelings and thoughts and opinions about all of that, but we have to filter how much that comes through in our presentation with others, especially if we have preconceived biases or prejudices against certain populations. You want to be careful how your facial expression or your tone of voice or inflection in voice or body posture, all the nonverbal as well as verbal ways we might be communicating that, and maybe causing more harm than good by doing so to those that we're working with. So far we've covered ambiance, professional presentation, cultural appropriateness, and sensitivity. The fourth thing that I wanted to discuss is setting a metaphor about what the counseling profession actually means to you, what it is that we're here to do. And along with that is step number 5, which is setting the parameters for counseling, which includes discussing confidentiality, how counseling relationship or whatever that professional relationship is different from a friendship or a non-professional relationship. And so I think the best way that I can describe how to do this is to model for you the speech that I kind of give everyone on their first day. So here it goes. So thank you so much for coming in today. Before I go ahead and give you the floor, there's a few things that I'd like to discuss with you that was in the informed consent, but of course I want to highlight certain parts that I feel are essential for us to be on the same page about before we begin. So my name is Gemma Andaya. I am a mental health and substance abuse counselor. I've been in this field for about 4 to 5 years, and, including education and post-education experience. I am currently in private practice. I am a PhD candidate at the University of the Cumberlands, and I teach at Great Basin College. I have experience working with HIV-affected individuals, with mandated probation parole clients, with co-occurring disorders, meaning both mental health and substance abuse. But I think fundamentally what guides my practice is my very basic belief about counseling, which I want to share with you. So it's very simple. I don't consider myself the expert in your life, and so I won't be giving you advice of any sort. I'll act more as a mirror, or sometimes maybe even an x-ray machine, to show you, reflect back to you what I'm hearing you say, what I'm seeing you do, patterns in your relationships or behaviors or emotional patterns. And sometimes that's not going to be easy work. So I just want to let you know that, I have you in best interest, and the interventions that I do, I will try to be as sensitive as possible, but sometimes it's not going to be easy to hear. And so I just ask that you trust me and trust in the process. Any questions about that? Okay, so let's take a pause there, and then I'll continue with the second portion of that modeling exercise. So there's a few things that I did there. First of all, I introduced myself. I get their buy-in by just explaining a little bit of my experience, especially because I'm a little bit younger. I kind of get that, I hate to say it, but a prejudiced look, like, what is she going to do? Or what does she know? At least initially from clients. So I've found that going through my educational and professional experience kind of helps get their buy-in and start letting some of their guards down, like, I know what I'm doing. So that's the first thing I did. The second thing is I give them a metaphor in regards to what it is that we are doing here. I feel like a metaphor, painting a picture, giving them a mental image seems to really help to make it concrete what exactly this is. And okay, so I think that pretty much covers what I just did. Obviously, you would modify as you see fit. So then the second portion to that introduction, if they don't have any questions or comments, which typically they don't, we'll move on, and I'll say, all right, well, the second portion I wanted to talk to you about before I go ahead and give you the floor is I wanted to describe to you, obviously, this therapeutic relationship is different than your regular friendships or other types of coworker relationships. Primarily what makes this professional relationship different is that I am a medical professional, and so I fall under certain federal regulations that prohibit me from being able to share what you say in here outside of here. And I want you to have confidence that, of course, I will abide by that. There are a few exceptions to that confidentiality in which I am a mandated reporter, and I just want to give those exceptions to you at the forefront in case this were to come up. So the first exception is if you were to disclose that there's any type of child abuse, elderly abuse, or abuse of somebody who's mentally delayed or mentally incapacitated. by law, because those are vulnerable individuals, and they can't protect themselves, I have to go ahead and report that to the authorities if it were to come up. Next, if you were to disclose that you're having a serious thoughts, not just fleeting thoughts, about suicide or homicide, but serious thoughts with maybe even a plan to go ahead and do so and an intent to commit these acts, by law, I do have to report that to the authorities as well. Lastly, if if you are expecting to be in any type of court proceedings, I do want you to know that if the opposing party were to find out that you are in counseling and therapy, they might require that I present certain materials or give a letter of summary of what we've been working on in court. I don't have to do it unless I am subpoenaed by the judge. And in that case, by law, I have to comply. So knowing all of these exceptions, do you still feel comfortable going into this counseling relationship? And I've honestly never had one single person say no after that, if that's a concern of yours. So a few things reflecting back on that introduction. What am I doing? First of all, I'm reiterating that this is a professional relationship. That in itself sets a psychological stage, because I don't want this. I want there to be healthy boundaries between me and this client. And so I don't want to joke around or, use vulgar language that might break me outside of the confines of a professional dynamic. And so I keep reiterating, this is different from those friendships, or this is different from work relationships. At some points, I actually, because this is such an intimate process, you have to, not initially, it's never happened to me, but later on throughout sessions, I've had to differentiate, like, this level of intimacy that we have here, it's great, but this is different from romantic interest, because, they can misinterpret that sometimes. So yes, we're reiterating that this is a professional relationship, and then we're giving them some sense of assurance that what they say will be confidential, as long as it's not falling under one of these categories. And so that way, if it ever were to come up that, you have to have somebody hospitalized or have to call the police or CPS or elderly abuse services, you're kind of covered that one, they signed your informed consent, and two, you verbally reviewed what was on that informed consent with them. All right, well, I believe that is all I have for you in regards to setting the psychological stage. I will come back later this semester for a second segment on actual interviewing or counseling skills. I hope you found it helpful. Thanks.